Hello everybody, my name is Zhang. I am a PhD student in the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University. Today I'll present our work, How Usable Are iOS App Privacy Labels. This work is in collaboration with Yuanyuan, Feng, Yaxing, Lorrie, Cranor, and Sadeh. Notice and consent have been foundational principles in privacy and data protection for over decades. Notice is typically addressed through the publication of a privacy policy. In practice, users rarely read these privacy policies, which are not just long and difficult, but also tend to be ambiguous or silent about important issues. The concept of privacy nutrition labels were first introduced by Kelly and colleagues. Behind the idea is that privacy policies are faulty. These privacy nutrition labels offer a standardized and succinct way of informing people about data collection and use practices, focusing on a small set of issues that particularly matter to most users. In December 2020, Apple introduced the app privacy labels on the App Store. Recently, Google's Play Store also rolled out the data safety sections. These are reminiscent of the privacy nutrition labels introduced and evaluated in research over a decade earlier. The iOS privacy labels have been available for over 600,000 apps for a period of time, opening the door for researchers to study their effectiveness in the wild. We are interested in finding out, do these privacy labels actually work and are they usable? To answer these questions, we conduct the first interview study with lay iPhone users to investigate their experiences, understanding, and perceptions of Apple's privacy labels. We recruited 24 participants across the United States and conducted interviews over Zoom. Let me briefly explain the study protocol. We start with questions about participants' experiences using an iPhone and downloading apps. We ask them whether they had wondered about or investigated what information apps collect, and whether privacy was a factor when downloading apps. Then we ask participants to share their iPhone screen through Zoom and ask them to visit the App Store on their phone and read the compact and detailed privacy labels of two apps, DoorDash and Chipotle, in a randomized order. For each app, we ask some specific questions related to the privacy labels, such as their understanding of terms in the labels and their interpretations of data practices disclosed, and to compare several similar terms and explain the differences if there were any. After participants completed all the questions for both apps, we asked about their general perceptions of the privacy labels, including whether they found these labels to be useful or not, what they liked or disliked about these labels, and whether they would use them in the future. In addition, we also asked whom they consider to be the source of the information presented in the labels. Let's move on to the results of the study. Most participants have questions about app privacy, but generally lack the usable sources for answers. Many participants did report having privacy concerns regarding apps. Some described removing newly downloaded apps because specific personal information was requested during sign-up. Some indicated that they had deleted apps after a data breach or learning about privacy concerns regarding these apps. Most of the participants were unaware of privacy labels. Only a few had actually read them. Some knew that they existed but scrolled past them in the App Store. Here we report participants' perceptions of privacy labels. Most participants reported finding these labels to be useful. For example, one participant specifically said the labels compared favorably to lengthy privacy policies. Most participants reported that they would refer to the labels in the future, and the labels would impact their decision to download apps. Some participants reported that they would look at the privacy labels for apps that they were not familiar with, or to use them to compare apps. 3/10 of the participants mistakenly assumed that Apple is responsible for the labels. Specifically, a few participants thought Apple and the app developers together produced the labels, while some thought the labels were provided by Apple. Also, the majority wrongly believed that Apple had reviewed or verified the information in the labels. We reported misunderstanding that our participants expressed as they look at the two privacy labels. At a high level, about half our participants mistakenly assumed the label included all app data collection and usage. However, Apple does not require disclosure of all app data collection. Disclosure is optional for data that are not used for tracking or advertising purposes, collected infrequently, and collected in the app's user interface. And about half were confused about label structure itself, especially how to find the purposes, and also they did not understand why specific data types were shown multiple times. For instance, when we asked about what app functionality means, participants try to explain it by looking at things underneath, such as purchases and financial information. And they weren't really sure how these data types shown are related to app functionality. There is also a lot of misunderstanding and confusion around terminology used in the labels. All participants express confusion about one or more terms used in the labels, or give interpretations of terms that did not match Apple's definition. For instance, Apple's definition of tracking actually only refers to third-party tracking. However, this is not clear to participants. Some participants consider tracking to mean first-party tracking, and they were surprised to find that tracking involves sharing information with other parties rather than just collecting data such as the user's location or app usage. Participants were also confused by data linked to you and data not linked to you. Especially, they were confused by data such as contact information and their data not linked to you. One participant commented, "It states it's not linked to you, but obviously it is linked to you because it's your personal information, like your address, your email address, your phone number, and your name. These are all very personal things that are specifically you, as opposed to them stating this is like completely anonymous." Actually, we as privacy researchers are not also confused by this part of the label, and we are not even sure why this is the case as well. There are also entangled and overlapping definitions used in the labels. For example, most participants were particularly confused about the terms product personalization, app functionality, and ad analytics. They either admitted that they did not know the definitions of these terms or give their own definitions in which they mix up the terms. You can find more examples like this in the paper. There also are frequently used terms describing data types that confuse participants. For example, usage data, identifiers, and diagnostics. The data category user content was called out as confusing by about half of our participants. Another source of confusion is the vague language. When participants saw terms on the label related to other data types and other purposes, almost all expressed that they did not know what these other categories could entail. And about half our participants said these terms made them anxious or decreased the utility of the label. For other examples of vague language, please refer to the paper. Our participants had a number of ideas for improvements. The majority of our participants suggested making the definitions of the label terms more accessible. Currently, the definition of the terms are available through a link to a web page with all the definitions in one place. However, many participants wanted to see each term linked to its definitions, perhaps appearing through a hover. Many also suggested providing concrete and contextualized examples of the data being collected. Many participants voiced their frustration with the labels due to their lack of controls, and they suggested adding controls to turn off some of the data collection. Recall that participants found the structure of the label to be confusing, and many had the misconception that some sections were redundant. Underlying this confusion is that the label designers mapped a multi-dimensional space of data types and purposes onto a list-based label representation. A matrix or tabular approach might offer a more compact and intuitive representation. Participants suggested other topics related to privacy that they would like to see added to the label. Some participants asked about data retention. Some participants were interested in knowing to whom the apps are sending or sharing their information. A few participants wanted to know where they could have their questions answered. A few users wanted to better understand the privacy implications of using the app and any measures the app was taking to protect their privacy. In summary, we have found that the iOS privacy labels in their current implementations are not delivering the promises. We provide the following 3 recommendations. First of all, the labels should do a better job at helping users to comprehend complex app privacy practices. Currently, the labels suffer from a range of misunderstandings. In addition, vague language such as other categories or user content also impede participants' understanding of the actual data practices. We've also observed the definition of the terms are not completely consistent on the Android and iOS platforms, such as the term tracking. It would be better if the industry were to adopt standard terms and definitions for privacy labels, empirically tested with both developers and lay users. Secondly, even though the privacy labels were introduced in Apple's App Store over a year ago at the time of our study, most of our participants were still unaware of them. Our findings shows that the discoverability of these labels on each individual app's page in the App Store is low. Currently, users have to scroll past a number of sections before landing on the app privacy section. There is a need for more prominent placement of privacy labels, and also additional mechanisms to bring users' attention to privacy labels for apps that users already have on their phones. Thirdly, some participants reported being disappointed because after learning the information presented by the labels, they were not provided with any actionable steps they could take. It would be helpful if the permission manager or the permission settings would include the relevant app privacy labels, or the privacy nudges on the mobile platforms would include links to the labels, because those places are where users decide which permissions or whether to grant certain permissions to each app. Also, the privacy labels are shown within the descriptions of individual apps in the App Store. There's no functionality to enable users to compare apps or look for equivalent apps with less invasive or more desirable data practices. The App Store should enable users to search for apps that meet certain privacy criteria. This concludes my presentation, and thank you for your attention.